Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast. Did you know that plants are truly amazing? Not only can you grow them and eat them, you can also wear them, drink them, nourish your skin with them, and so much more. Let Ellen and Michael inspire you to love plants as much as they do, as they chat with the movers and shakers in this wonderful plant-based world. So, let's dig in.
Hello and welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast, brought to you by me, Ellen Mary, and Michael Perry. We should all be cautious of caring for our environment and making small, sustainable changes in our daily lives. So why not start by making delicious changes? Stoneleigh Wines create their premium wine in New Zealand, and it's made from 100% sustainably sourced grapes, and it's vegan certified. Stoneleigh Sauvignon Blanc expresses the vibrancy and fresh flavours of the Marlborough region through their minimal intervention winemaking philosophy and collaboration with nature. We have a unique discount for our listeners. You can get 20% off Stoneleigh Sauvignon Blanc exclusively on Amazon using the code STONELEIGH20, STONELEIGH20.
Welcome to the Plant-Based Podcast News.
Your horticultural news roundup for the week. The Royal Horticultural Society has launched a new digital collections platform, allowing anyone to access 10,000 library items and herbarium specimens online for free. The collections are available for everyone, so children doing their homework can learn from them, and even academic researchers. To us, all of us garden lovers who just want to browse some of the outstanding botanical art made available on the platform. You can find out more by looking online at collections.rhs.org.uk.
A survey of 3,000 UK homeowners shows that only 49% would disclose Japanese knotweed being on their property. Commenting on the research, Managing Director of Japanese knotweed specialist Adam Brindle said, "Given that knotweed can be complicated and costly to remove, it's understandable that some people would be nervous when trying to sell their home. However, property owners need to be transparent early on about the presence of Japanese knotweed and other invasive species such as bamboo."
Are you looking forward to the RHS Chelsea Flower Show this year? It's not long to go to perhaps what is the most well-known gardening show in the world. And at this year's Chelsea, there are royal tributes that include a tranquil garden filled with some of the Windsor family's favourite plants, a life-size topiary display of Queen Elizabeth II's pony Emma, and a display of roses celebrating the coronation of King Charles III. All of these are among the royal tributes at the show, and you can find out more about them all online at rhs.org.uk/Chelsea.
The RHS says that it will have 70 nurseries at Chelsea, with promises that the pavilion is returning to the former glory. Shows director Helen Pettit said the nurseries are the beating hearts of the flower shows, and the RHS loves working with them and forever promoting the work that they do. She said the Chelsea had a few challenging years, but will be even fuller in 2023.
a new gardening and wellbeing course for adults has been launched in Bradford. The 6-week course run by training provider Realise is being held at the newly opened Skills Hub at the Home Centre behind Home Church. It's open to local residents over the age of 19 who have lived in the UK for at least 3 years, and it's completely free of charge to complete. The course runs on Tuesdays between 9:15 and 2:45 and will cover themes such as how to grow food, home garden setup and maintenance, composting, seedlings and germination, sustainable gardening, insects and pests. Hi everyone. As you will know by now, if you listen to the podcast, a couple of episodes ago you would have heard Michael doing his first solo interview for the Plant-Based Podcast. Actually, it's not our first, because there have been times throughout the series that we've both done solo episodes, but we have had a shake-up for this series. So usually we have an interview and then in between we have a news and a bit of a gossip, but we don't want to bore you with our gossips. We want to save those up. So you'll still hear us gossiping after our, usual interviews every other week. But in between, Michael and I are going to be doing solo episodes. So here's my first one. And I was so thrilled to be able to chat with Primrose Hall Peonies because I'm a big Peonies fan. So if you love to grow peonies, if you wonder how to grow them, if you want some tips, and there's some really great tips as well, and you're going to be really pleased about how easy they are to grow, and some hints about varieties and a new book all about glorious peonies, then that's what's coming up next. I got the chance to chat with Alec White from Primrose Hall Peonies. So gardeners are often asked what their favourite flowers are, and often top of that list is the fancy peony. It's definitely one of my favourites, and you could say that I have a love affair with them, but not anywhere near as much as Alec White from Primrose Hall Peonies, who knows them inside out, upside down, and has recently released a book about them as well. So here with us today on the podcast, you can get all of the best tips about growing peonies. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, hello.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. It's a slightly dreary April day, but on the plus side, the peonies are shooting beautifully and they're really putting some legs on at the moment. So,
do you know,
it's an exciting time of year.
It is exciting time of year, and where I am, it's kind of half and half, a bit cloudy, a bit of sun, but we've had a couple of really nice days and a couple of really rainy days, and I nipped to the allotment just the other day, and the peonies have shot up so fast in that weather, and I feel full of excitement for them.
It's astonishing, isn't it, how quickly they go from just a pink jewel-like bud in the ground, barely visible, to 2 or 3 weeks later, and they've put on 6 to 9 inches. And of course, by the end of this month, early May perhaps, they'll be 3 feet tall in the garden. I mean, it's astonishingly fast. Yeah.
It is. And I noticed also on social media, especially, obviously when the shoots start coming through the ground in spring of any plant, everyone gets really excited because it's like just fills you with so much hope. But I noticed there's always so many posts about the peony shoots because they're really funky little shoots as well, aren't they? They just look so cool when they pop up.
Mostly they're bright pink, but some of them can be red. Some of them can be white. They're just full of promise. And I think the expectation, the waiting for your peony to flower is part of the fun, actually, of having peonies, because the window is relatively short. I'm not going to say it's short, but it's relatively short. It's something really to look forward to.
It really is. Now, before we even get into, how to grow them, all about you, about your new book, all of that kind of thing, the relatively short peony flowering time is the one thing, when you say to someone, what's your favorite flower? And someone will say peonies, and they often come up top of the list. They're definitely like top of my list. And then someone else will always say, oh, but they don't flower for very long, but when they flower, they're just amazing. So it's worth every single day that they flower, or the weight, the shoots, all of it.
Well, I think it's a plant for all seasons. I would say that, wouldn't I? But I do think it's exciting in the spring. I think the jewel-like buds are very exciting. I think the foliage at this time of year, often with the lactifloras, will be bright red, burgundy coloured. So it's quite striking in a garden that's pretty devoid of any colour at this time of year. Obviously, then we have the flowers. And peonies will flower in this country for longer than most people think. Generally, April through to the end of June. In some cases, early July, if you're really up north in Scotland or what have you. So you've got 3 months, and so whilst each individual plant might only flower for a couple of weeks, and of course the intersectional peonies will flower for maybe 4 or 5 weeks to get a bit more out of those. With the right varieties in the garden, you can have peonies flowering April
as you will know by now, if you listen to the podcast a couple of episodes ago, you would have heard
awesome
Michael doing his first solo interview for the Plant-Based Podcast. Actually, it's not our first, because there have been times throughout the series that we've both done solo episodes, but we have had a shake-up for this series.
Fantastical colours.
So usually we have an interview, and then in between we have a news and a bit of a gossip. But we don't want to bore you with our gossips. We want to save those.
I can't commend them highly enough.
So you'll still hear us gossiping after our, usual interviews every other week.
It's not just about the
flowers,
in between,
Michael and I are going to be doing solo
let's go
episodes.
Back to the beginning.
So here's my first
find
one,
out a little bit
and
more.
I was so thrilled to be able to chat with Primrose Hall Peonies, because I'm a big Peonies fan. So
like
if
a lot of people, my journey
love
into
to
gardening
grow
started when I was a
peonies,
child with my
if you wonder how to grow them, if you want some tips, and there's some really great tips as well, and you're going to be really pleased about how easy they are to grow.
Used to grow chrysanthemums,
and some hints about varieties, and a new book all about glorious peonies.
I can remember watching him in the garden.
I got the chance to chat with Alec White from Primrose Hall
curling them
Peonies.
pencils and disbudding them and all the rest of it. And but I was fascinated by it. Hours in the garden as the sun's setting, and you just don't even notice because you're so taken in with what you're doing. And then later on, moved into vegetables at home, the little vegetable garden, and really enjoyed that. And I guess that's where my love affair with gardening really started, and just being outside. And when I was about 13, when my school friends were getting paper round and getting up early and doing all that kind of stuff, I got a job at a local garden centre. And my job was to water the hanging baskets. And there was about 3,000 of them. And I got absolutely drenched every day. I loved it. It was fantastic. But from there, I started working on Saturdays and then Sundays, and just being around the plants. And in those days, the garden centre, we used to grow plants as well. So there was production going on too. So it was absolutely fascinating. And I decided then that's what I wanted to do as a career. But the careers advisor said, that's not a sensible thing to do. You'll never make any money out of it, blah, 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 blah. And so I went into law, did that for a while. And they bought the nursery about 20 years ago now. And it was a bedding plant nursery. I love bedding plants. I know they're not necessarily particularly popular these days, but I think, they are fantastic, but really difficult to grow. You've only got to get a bit of frost or a bit too much heat. And so anyway, I started growing perennials, and I can recall one afternoon looking out across the perennial beds, and we had all sorts of different perennials growing. Typical cottage garden scene, with all the different colours and the flowers waving in the wind. And standing in the middle, majestically, were 2 blooms. I had no idea what they were at the time. One was a silky, deep ruby red, and the other was a big puffball white, double white. And they just stood literally head and shoulders above everything else. They were
calling out to you, weren't they? They were.
And I went out and I thought, what are they? They're incredible. They were, of course, peonies. And within a few days, it was all done and dusted. But I couldn't get them out of my head. And that's really where it started for me. And those first 2 varieties, Festiva Maxima and Peter Brand,
right,
where it all started for me. And from then on, I dropped the perennials, just started growing peonies. And now we've got, at any given time, about 60,000 in commercial production.
Wow.
Both in the field and in containers. We've got the Plant Heritage National Collection of Intersectional Hybrids. And we've got about 400 cultivars in commercial production, with a few more that, we're keeping just for breeding or what have you. So it's really, it's become a big thing for us now.
You could say. So basically, you really do live and breathe peonies. It's funny, isn't it, how kind of so many guests who come onto the podcast will say that their kind of journey into horticulture, whatever route they took, started when they were young, just having that little spark ignited by doing something as a child. And then how many people also say, at school or in careers, or perhaps even with their parents saying they wanted to work in horticulture, it was no, or you can't do that, or there aren't any careers, or you won't make any money. We hear that story so often. And I just really, really hope that changes, because, whilst it can be tough in horticulture, and can't doubt that in any way, it's immensely satisfying. And just, I can't imagine what your place must look like when you walk in and you've got 60,000 around about peonies blooming, at any
it's insane. It's insane. And in fact, some of the crop is grown in polytunnels. Some of it is grown in the field, and some of it's grown in containers. If you go in one of the polytunnels, when you've got even just 300 or 400 plants flowering, the fragrance is overwhelming. It's overwhelming, so much so that I can't stay in there for more than a few minutes, because it actually makes you feel quite nauseous, because some of them, Bouldenage, for example, is beautiful double white, so highly fragrant, so sweet, en masse like that is
a lot.
Quite a bit, yeah.
That's a big whiff for sure.
Yeah, but no, it's great. And, I think it is a shame that we don't encourage more people into horticulture, because I think as an industry, we do have particular strengths in this country. We have such a long heritage. We've got some great growers. We've got real talent and knowledge. But for some reason, we've never managed to commercialize it in the same way that others have, particularly the Dutch. Yeah. And so as a result, we don't really, as a country, value it or respect it in the same way. Maybe that will change now with Brexit, and we've got more growers having to deal with stuff here in the UK.
Yeah.
I can only hope that that's a positive thing. But it is a good career, and whilst you might not earn the same amount of money as you would if you're an investment banker or lawyer, perhaps, as you say, it's tremendously rewarding, and you can earn a living out of it.
Yeah, you can earn a living out of it, absolutely. And also, I do think perhaps it will change going forward a little, because so many people are now much more concerned about rightly so, about the environment, sustainability, and younger people are much more interested in the outdoors now, or there's a vast majority of them that are, because of the climate and such like. So hopefully that will push horticulture, up the agenda for sure. However, we must talk about peonies, and I would love to know some tips for growing them. So I have a collection of them on my allotment in the cut flower patch. And here's the thing, I don't really do much with them at all. And every year they flower and they look absolutely beautiful. I mulch them each year. I remove the foliage generally. I actually done that a couple of weeks ago. I mean, the old foliage from last year. And then they will get watered in particularly dry spells. Otherwise, I don't do a lot with them at all. So I may be doing that entirely wrong, but would love some tips from you, please.
Well, secret about peonies is they kind of thrive on neglect. We don't like to say that, but actually they are really easy to grow, and it's one of the reasons I love them so much. The flowers can look quite delicate, and people often think, oh, they don't flower for very long, they're very delicate, they must be difficult to grow. And actually nothing could be further from the truth. They are super hardcore, easy to grow, perfect plants for beginners, perfect plants for kind of gardeners like me that really just don't have all the time in the world to get out in the garden. So they're not going to punish you if you don't cut back the foliage in the autumn and you do it in the spring, as you just said. They don't care. I would recommend cutting it back in the autumn just for hygiene reasons.
Yeah.
Less likely to get damp problems in the spring. But beyond cutting it back in the autumn, if you've got reasonable soil, there really isn't very much to do to them. And in fact, the more you play with them, the more trouble you're likely to have. So I'm going to give you a few top tips, and then I'm going to come back and talk about your peonies.
Yeah.
My first tip, there's four top tips.
Yeah.
My first one is buy your peony from us. Shameless, but
we agree.
the key point here is that peonies need to have a certain maturity to flower. They don't tend to flower reliably until they're 5 years old. So getting a mature plant will make a big difference. Having a mature plant also means it's less likely to succumb to any kind of pest or disease.
Yeah.
So an established plant is really important. And you can't always tell that from the top growth. It's about the maturity of the rootstock. That's what we're talking about. Something that's got at least 3 to 5 eyes or buds on. So a nice mature plant to start with. Secondly, plant it in full sun if you can. They do like lots of sun.
Yeah.
There are some varieties that will do quite well in the shade. And I've set them out in the book so you can have a look there. But in the main, full sun is what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Any soil will do. Third top tip, any soil will do as long as it's free draining. Has to be free draining. They don't like getting wet feet in the winter because these little soft buds that are just below the surface will then just rot off. And those buds are formed in the autumn time. They are the flower buds for the following year. So if they rot off in the winter, you won't get any flowers the following year.
Okay.
So free draining soil is absolutely essential, but any soil will do. They're really not fussy. And finally, perhaps the most important thing, you do have to remember to plant them at the correct depth. So for herbaceous peonies, Sarah Bernhardt's, your lactifloras, intersectional peonies, all of those, they need to be planted no more than 1 inch or 2 below the surface. So very, very, very shallow. If they're any deeper than that, you will have problems with them flowering.
Right.
May flower the first year because they will have formed the buds the previous year before you planted them, but they will start to stop flowering. If you've got a tree peony, which aren't really tree peonies, they're more just woody, shrubby peonies, but, tends to be what people call them.
Tree peony sounds cool, that's why.
Well, and they can get to 7 or 8 feet tall left if you want. Although they do respond really well to a good hard prune, so I wouldn't feel shy about doing that. They'll really thank you for it. But most tree peonies you'll buy in the UK will be the Japanese Saffroticosa cultivars, and they will all be grafted. And so with a grafted plant, really, we want to make sure the graft union, the swelling where the top part of the plant is attached to the rootstock, is at least 6 inches below the surface. So for the grafted plants, plant them a bit deeper, and that will mean that you get a stronger plant and the rootstock will take. If, however, you've got a woody peony that isn't grafted, then your 2 to 3 inches rule applies as normal.
Okay.
And that's really it for peonies. Once you've planted them, kind of just leave them alone. They're long-lived plants. They've been around for, 100,000 years or so. They will live in your garden for at least 60 years. Some of the varieties will live for 100 years or more.
Wow.
They don't need to be dug up and divided every year. If you want to dig them up when they reach a certain size and divide them and split them, then you may do it in the autumn time. But generally, they just like to be left alone. And they, as I say, they require very little in the way of maintenance. If you've got some of the taller cut flower varieties, you might need to put a plant support on.
Yeah.
If you do have those varieties, mostly they're lactifloras. Now, April is the time to put the plant support on while the shoots are still only 5 or 6 inches tall. If you leave it much later, you will find that it's too difficult to get the plant support on. And then in the autumn, you'll need to cut back the dead foliage. And the plant will tell you when to cut it back. So it's not too complicated. It'll die down completely to the ground. Everything will be brown and dead. That's when you cut it back to the ground.
Simple as that.
It's really, really simple. Feeding isn't too much of an issue if you've got okay soil. They quite like a bit of clay. If you've got lighter soil, you can give them a feed in the autumn or the spring. We've got some peony feed, granular peony feed on our website that you can use. But don't overfeed them. Certainly, I'd be very wary about using any kind of liquid feed on them because that will stress the plant out. Feeding the plant in the season is not going to create any more flower buds. As I said, they create their flower buds for the following year, the previous autumn.
Right.
So it's really important that you look after the plant through the whole season to get a nice plant for the next year. They're pretty drought tolerant. They don't need too much water in the summer. But if it is really dry in July, August, it's worth just giving them a bit of a drink because, as I say, they are forming those buds. And beyond that, that's really all you have to do with them.
I think you know, like what you said, when you see them, they look so, beautiful and flouncy, and there's all these amazing, bright, colourful petals. So they look like a plant that's going to take a lot more care than they really do take. And when I first got mine, I think I was thinking at the time, I'm going to be in for, really taking care of these plants, but I just haven't had to. Like, they've done it pretty much all themselves. And obviously they have a reputation for not wanting to be moved or disturbed too much, but I moved mine maybe about 6 or 7 years ago. So I had them growing on an old allotment, then we moved house, so I had to get a new allotment. And now I was not leaving my peonies.
Yeah, absolutely.
I dug them all up. It was autumn, and I replanted them, and they all flowered the next year. Like, I've never had any problem with my peonies, and it's always such a joy to see them.
Well, moving them again is an old wives' tale. People say they don't like to be moved. It's true that you can plant them and leave them and they'll be fine for decades.
Yeah.
And they kind of do like to be left alone, it has to be said. But you can move them. But you have to remember the 4 rules that I just went through, really, about moving them. So if you are going to dig them up and move them, make sure that the plant is big enough and mature enough. It's not too small. You haven't divided it too many times. Make sure that you're putting it into free draining soil and you're planting at the correct depth. Provided you do those things, they'll be absolutely fine. Really no problem. I do find that very, very keen gardeners often can struggle with peonies, and they'll say, "Oh, my peony's not flowering anymore. It's just getting old, I suppose. It's getting tired." And you'll ask them, "Well, is it getting too much shade now?" Bearing in mind the peony can be in the garden for 60 or 70 years. When you plant it, everything around it's very small, but 60 or 70 years down the line, you've got an oak tree standing behind it, giving lots and lots of shade. And that will affect the flowering capability of the plant. But you also find people mulch them. And you said you mulch yours as well. So mulching is a bit of a controversial subject for me. And I generally say don't mulch peonies, purely because overzealous mulching can mean that you cover the crown and in fact bury the plant, which will over time not only stop it flowering because it's getting too deep, but also it can rot the rootstock and the crown. So if you are going to mulch, leave a big dish away from the base of the plant, mulch around it. Generally, they're not too bothered. They don't need it. As I say, if you've got really light soil, sandy soil, chalky soil, or what have you, then mulching can help. But I think in those scenarios, you're better off digging a bigger planting hole in the first place and putting a good 9 inches of organic matter at the bottom to act as a sponge. That's probably going to be better for you. But yeah, really easy to grow, really simple, super low maintenance. There's 1,001 reasons that everyone should have a peony in their garden.
I completely agree. Thank you. That's really good tips, actually. So the soil on my allotment is very, very sandy, and that's why it gets mulched. But I will make sure that there's some room around the plants when I mulch. So fingers crossed for this year. I'll just tell you a quick story before we go on. Many years ago, the very first TV appearance that I ever had was about British Cut Flowers Week. And the TV station, which was in East Anglia, wanted to come to my allotment to see my cut flowers. And this was, if I recall, the second year on the allotment. And I desperately wanted my peonies to flower. And I think I probably only had 2 or 3 at the time, in amongst some other cut flowers. and there was a field behind the allotment, and all I wanted to see was one peony flower so we could get the shot with the field behind, and because like you said, they just sort of stand out amongst everything else. And I would go to the allotment every day for a couple of weeks running up to British Flowers Week, and I beg that peony to flower. Please flower on time. They're only coming this one day for like 30 minutes. Please flower. And I literally begged that peony to flower. And lo and behold, on the day they came, there it was. One single beautiful peony. And we were able to record about British flowers, and I was able to talk about my love of peonies. So they even flower when you want them to.
Sometimes, not always.
Yeah, sometimes. Let's not talk about not always bit. Okay, moving on. You said that peonies can flower for decades and decades.
Yeah.
Do you have a peony that has flower like you've still got now? Like, what's your oldest physical peony, do you think?
It's probably about 16, 17 years.
That's good,
which isn't much. But if you talk to, I don't know, go to your local WI, as I do every now and then to give talks, and you talk to people who've got peonies in the garden, particularly the old-fashioned cottage garden peony, Officinalis rubriplana, they will say, yeah, that was in the garden when I moved. I moved in 50 years ago, and it was already there and well established. And I've had people tell me that they are aware that the plants have been in the garden for over 100 years. So they can be expensive to buy initially, compared to, I don't know, lavender or something. But actually they are really long-lived plants, and they're quite slow growing. But that does give them longevity. And they're remarkable plants. They're remarkable in so many ways. If you look at where they come from around the world, their kind of native distribution, they're incredibly adaptable. There's a couple of species from northern America, California area, so quite dry. We've got them in Europe. We've got them in the Mediterranean, in the Caucasus, in the Himalayas, China, Japan, all of that. And that has an incredible range of different habitats and environments. Mm. And the peony has managed to adapt to each of those different scenarios with real vigor. And that's part of its survival story. It's part of its success, really. So they are really, really tough. They just need to have free draining soil and some sun.
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you have any favorite varieties?
I'm going to start banning that question on podcasts.
I know, I love it, because sometimes people recoil in horror.
It's a terrible, terrible question. No. Yeah, is the answer. The problem is, you can ask me at any given time. So at the moment, I'm super excited about Claire de Lune.
Okay.
Claire de Lune is a beautiful, pale lemon, single flower. The foliage has got a slightly bluish tinge. It's beautifully scented. It's got a slightly different habit to some peonies in that it's quite lax. So instead of being vertical and upright, it's a bit more kind of chilled. And I'm really looking forward to that, because that normally is pretty reliable. The third week or so of April, that will flower on the nursery. And it's just such an incredible flower. But the truth is, you can catch me at any time of the year and I'm raving about one particular variety or the other. I've got a lollipop in my garden, which is an intersectional variety. It's yellow, a double yellow flower with semi-double with purple flashes going through the foliage. So it's quite striking.
Wow.
Not everybody's taste, perhaps. But I had 70 odd flowers on that last year.
Wow.
And it makes a really nice plant as well. It's nice and compact. It's nice and tidy. It's not straggly. It doesn't fall over at the top. It's a really nice plant in the garden. So I really like that one as well. I really like Katharina Fontin, which is a beautiful double Alactiflora, double white, pale blush pink, really. It's very, very subtle. Again, beautifully fragrant. And that's a real joy to see. But I mean, there's just so many. There are 5 different flower shapes with peonies generally. Single, semi-double, double, bomb shape, and anemone.
Yeah.
So you've got different flower shapes. You've got all of these colours that you can imagine. Bi-colours, straight colours, mixed. I mean, it's just the colour palette is astonishing. And then you have all the fragrances too. 5 different fragrances with peonies, which people often don't realise. Some of them are great as cut flowers, you've mentioned. And then you can get 3 to 4 feet tall with huge individual blooms. Some of the varieties are more subtle, particularly some of the more woodland type ones with smaller single flowers, which are incredibly delicate and very, very pretty. So there's just a whole range to choose from. It's really, really hard to pick a favourite.
But you have just mentioned a few, so we got there. We got them in.
Have a look at the book. Choose your own. There's loads.
We're coming to the book. I have to say, there's been a few references throughout this chat to having a love affair with peonies. I've said it, you said it, but actually, it is the name of your new book, A Love Affair with Peonies. Tell us all about it.
Well, I don't know what to say really.
You've got to sell your book now. It's the hardest thing to do.
It's a nice hardback book. It's a book that's been 5 years in the making, actually. And I wanted the book to be more than just a gardening book, more than just a book about how to grow peonies. I wanted to inspire people and to give people the confidence to go out and grow peonies. I think they're fantastic plants. I think they are the most amazing plant you can have in your garden. I like them more than roses, partly because they don't have any thorns and they don't get rust and black spot. But not going to say anything bad about roses, but they are incredible. And I wanted people to really get that message through. So the book is structured in a slightly different way to many books. There's a chapter at the beginning, which is my story. And bearing in mind, I've got no formal horticultural qualifications. Everything I've learnt to date has been through my own observation and practice and trial and error. There's a chapter on where they come from. There's a chapter on why they're tough and hardy. There's a chapter on cut flowers. There's a chapter on colour. There's a chapter on foliage. There's a whole chapter on what it's like to exhibit at Chelsea Flower Show and get a gold medal. There's a chapter on peonies through history and art and culture and how they've really influenced modern culture now. And at the very end, there's a whole chapter on where you can go and see some amazing peonies here in the UK. Now, I said it took about 5 years. The actual writing of the book didn't take me too long at all. But getting the images was a big challenge. And I wanted the book, as I said, to be inspirational. And that meant I needed lots of amazing photographs. And whilst we've been able to take some incredible photographs on the nursery over the years, close-ups and across the field and what have you, I wanted to be able to show peonies in the context of a garden setting as well.
Right.
Because it's easy to look at books about peonies and you've got lots of close-ups, which is great, but it doesn't show you what the plant as a plant looks like. It just focuses on the bloom. And I think there's more to peonies than just the bloom. So we, as I say, spent a number of years traveling around the country, photographing peonies in stately homes and other such gardens. And it was quite a challenge, I can tell you. Very often we'd get a phone call and they'd say, the peonies in the garden are in flower now. Pack everything into the car, drive up to Derby or wherever it was, take the photographs and come back. It was a bit like waiting for a pregnant mother, you know. We were on standby throughout the entire peony season to go anywhere in the country to get those photographs. And that took us a while because, the window for them is relatively short. And if you're photographing peonies in Devon, you can't be photographing peonies in Kent at the same time. So it took a few years to get all the images right. But the book is packed with incredible imagery and photographs. as I say, taken from around the UK, taken from on the nursery. We've got close-ups, we've got landscape shots. I think when you look at it, it's the kind of book, hopefully, you can dip in and out of. You haven't got to start at the beginning and go to the end. There is all the information in there about how to grow them and pests and diseases and all of that kind of stuff. But more than anything, it's a celebration of peonies. It's my love affair with them and why I think they're amazing in so many different ways.
It's often when we talk to people on the podcast or in general, you can hear the passion in someone's voice for what it is that they do in horticulture especially. But I think the title of this book is just so perfect, because you clearly do have a love affair with peonies. And just chatting with you, obviously on the podcast, listeners can't see you talking, but you are full of expression and passion, and you're talking about them, like you can tell that it's part of they are part of who you are and what you do, and that's really lovely. So where can listeners pick up a copy of your book?
You can go to our website, which is primrosehallpeonies.co.uk. It's available on our website now. It's in all good bookshops and other online retailers that we won't mention. Best place to get it is on our website, because on the website there's lots more information. There's blogs, there's all sorts of information you can get there. And of course, if you wanted to buy a peony, you could buy one too.
I think it would be almost impossible to visit your website and not pick up a peony at the same time, because I looked at them this morning and I've got a whole list now already of what I would like to add in to my already vastly growing peony cut flower patch.
I have to say, it should come with a health warning, because I find them incredibly addictive. And once you start collecting them, it's very difficult to stop. And the more peonies you have in the garden, the better, because you have them flowering for a much longer period. Right. So I would always encourage people to have as many peonies as possible in the garden.
Absolutely. I agree. And just before we finish up, last thing, you mentioned that you are, of course, a gold medal winner. Where will we be able to see you at the RHS shows this year for 2023?
We are taking a break from Chelsea this year. We will be back next year at Chelsea, but we are doing lots of flower shows this year. They're all listed on our website. So have a look on there, and that will be updated as we go. Okay. But yeah, the lots and lots of shows this year. We've already done a couple, I think. Okay.
Well, we'll definitely look forward to seeing you at the shows. Anyone listening, if you're going to any of the shows, make sure you stop by the Primrose Hall Peonies kind of show garden stand, because honestly, you won't be able to walk away without a peony. But the Chelsea ones especially, they are exceptional. So I look forward to seeing you there next year. You've had a bath full of peonies. Yep. You have like the perfect spots for Instagrammers to go and get their photographs. It's just a riot of peonies, basically, always.
We love them.
Actually, I just remembered the when you done one which was mainly all about the foliage. That was really cool, because I think it was just out of season, wasn't it? I can't remember what show.
It was the September one. Chelsea in September.
Chelsea. That was it. So obviously there weren't any peonies in flower, but you'd done a really cool look at what the foliage, all the different types of foliage later on in the year, and that was really clever. And it was a really, really cool thing to see.
And you got a silver gilt for that.
Only it's because there wasn't one in flower. You only needed one in flower, and you would have got gold.
But no, that was really interesting. That was really interesting. As I say, I think September's a difficult time of year to exhibit peonies, but there is something to say about peonies in the autumn, and I don't want people to forget about them at that time of year, because they are still giving some colour, even if it's just through the foliage.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm quite sure we're going to be seeing more peonies in people's gardens just from this very episode. So thank you so much. We'll let you get back to your peony shoots and whatever you need to be doing in your nursery.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Be sure to check out our sponsor, Stoneleigh Wines. Their premium wines in New Zealand are made from 100% sustainably sourced grapes, and they're vegan certified. Our favourite, the Stoneleigh Sauvignon Blanc, displays fresh and varietally true aromas of passion fruit and vibrant citrus and crisp notes. Yummy. We have an exclusive discount for listeners, and you can get 20% off Stoneleigh Sauvignon Blanc exclusively on Amazon when you use the code Stoneleigh20. The music for the Plant-Based podcast is part of the song Grow by Mikey James, and our editor is Gareth Patch of Semi Echo.